Hi, everybody. So, in this lecture, I'm going to give you an overview of what you'll read this week, and we're going to jump right into some cool stuff. I'm recording this in my house, as you're probably expecting, and what that means is that you're probably going to hear some weird background noise. I have a 5-year-old, and he's currently in the living room playing with my husband, and every now and then he lets out a shriek. So, I don't know. If you hear some weird noises, just know that I'm not murdering anyone. I've just got a kid who's playing in my house. Anyway, here's what we're reading this week. The first thing you're reading is an excerpt from Judith Butler's book, Gender Trouble. And this is not something that you need to buy. This is I just am photocopying one chapter from this book for you. And I've turned it into a PDF and I've put it in the module. And so you should see it there now. And not that you shouldn't buy the book if it interests you, but it's a long work of kind of philosophy. It's sort of hard to understand. I think one chapter is probably enough for our purposes. This book really changed the field of gender studies. In fact, it I don't want to say it single-handedly created the field of gender studies, but it was a big deal when it came out. It was a seminal work, I guess. So Judith Butler published this in 1990. Gosh, that was like 30 years ago. I'm having a moment. I'm older than a lot of you guys. So I'm 41. So to me, 30 years ago wasn't really, I don't know. It doesn't really seem like that long ago. The point is, this book was published a while ago. And since then, it's become more famous. It's become very controversial. People love her for it and people hate her for it. And part of the reason for that, well, the whole reason for that, is that in this book, she argues that gender and, in fact, biological sex are a social construct. So Butler is still alive. She's still teaching at Berkeley, as far as I know. And she's a pioneer in the field of gender studies. In some ways, she kind of started the field of gender studies. Not single-handedly, but she was one of the big first people to kind of discuss gender in the way that we discuss it now a lot of the time. So this book is still widely read. It's still widely fought about. The central argument of the book is that gender is a social construct, so gender being not the biological parts you're born with, but whether you identify as a man or a woman, or neither a man nor a woman, or sort of both, or whatever, the kind of way you feel is gender, or how you identify inside is gender, versus sex being like the biological facts of your body, sort of. That's typically the way we define gender versus sex. That probably sounds somewhat familiar to you guys. But Butler in this book is arguing that not only is gender a social construct, but that because it's so hard to untangle from biological sex, from the biological facts of your body, we really have to consider biological sex as a construct as well. And this at first might seem completely illogical, but in the book, the way she makes the case for it is to say, for example, we think of male bodies as being, for instance, bigger than female bodies. And on the whole, maybe they are, but also there are reasons for that go beyond just the way you're born. So for instance, men might lift weights more than women. They might make their bodies physically bigger than women. Women might diet to become smaller. Men might not want to do that and might try to take more, I don't know, if they drink protein shakes or whatever. I feel like I'm just spouting stereotypes now and I'm becoming more awkward than I normally am. But there might be ways in which we socially feel pressure to make our bodies bigger or smaller, and then do that and end up actually making our bodies bigger or smaller. So we might undergo liposuction to become smaller, or we might have some type of muscular implants to become bigger. Oh God, what am I talking about? There might be ways that, or we might, for instance, as little boys, eat more protein because we might think, oh, if I eat a lot of chicken, I'm going to grow really tall. And as little girls, we might kind of think, oh, I should be smaller, and so I'm going to eat less food. Or so that might actually end up influencing our height or the size of our body. Probably not like, it's a possibility, I guess. So if you really try to look closely at nature versus nurture, it's really hard to untangle the two, is her argument. It's not that there aren't biological facts. It's that biological facts, because they're written on so much by culture and because they're interpreted through the lens of culture and people who see men as this and women as this, it's really hard to like differentiate it from a social construct. And so for this reason, she thinks biological sex is, in a way, a social construct. This is controversial, like I said, but this is what she thinks. So this chapter in particular is an interesting one, and I've assigned it because it contains her famous argument, maybe her most famous argument of all time. It's really what she's known for, that gender is a performance, that gender is a performative thing. So it's not something that we are, she argues, it's something that we do. And this is really interesting. The more you think about it, at least for me, it's one of those things that once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it, if you know what I mean. So Butler believes that all of us are constantly acting out gender. We are constantly acting out and broadcasting to the world what we are. So she thinks that whether we're transgender or cisgender, we're doing this. So she doesn't just think, she says we're all in drag all the time. I'll just say it. And she doesn't just think that people who would have traditionally been thought of as being in drag are in drag. So I was labeled a woman when I was born, or a female, whatever, baby when I was born, before my memory existed. And I identify as a woman. And she would argue that I'm also in drag all of the time, even though I identify with the sex I was assigned at birth. And to see what she means, or to understand what she means by this, you can consider all of the ways that I'm broadcasting to the world that I'm a woman, ways that don't involve the biological facts of my existence. So I grow my hair long and I style it in a way that might be considered traditionally feminine. Not lately, because I'm quarantined at home and who cares what my hair looks like, but when I go to campus, you know, I might straighten my hair and I curl my hair and I put special stuff in it to make it less frizzy and make it look smoother and to make it smell like flowers, and all of those are things that are associated with femininity. I might try to talk in a voice that's slightly higher than the voice that I actually have, because I'm self-conscious. I have a deep voice for a woman, and I've always kind of been aware of it, and it's always made me a little bit uncomfortable, and so I think subconsciously I'm always talking in a slightly higher pitched voice than I actually have. Like when I sing, my singing voice is pretty deep. Not to get, this is weird and getting personal, but I'm just, what else do I have other than my personal experience? So I wear makeup, like if you've ever seen me on campus, you might notice that I have eyebrows, but in real life, I don't have eyebrows. They're basically blonde and they're white, and the older I get, the more white they get, but I draw them on so that you can see that I have eyebrows, but they're colorless. So this is one way that I'm kind of broadcasting my gender to the world. Like, hey, I care if I have eyebrows, and here they are, everybody look at my eyebrows. I'll put on like lipstick sometimes. There are other ways that we might kind of broadcast our gender that are even more subtle. So women and men might exercise differently to make parts of their body appear bigger or smaller or more toned or more whatever. You can see all of these YouTube tutorials on how to build up this muscle and make this part of your body flatter and smaller and tighter, and I don't know, all of these ways that we exercise to like magnify certain physical features and minimize certain other physical features. These are all ways that we're modifying our physical appearance so that we appear more masculine or feminine. And it goes on and on and on. Maybe I don't need to go into hair removal. Maybe you know what I'm talking about when I say hair removal can be a way that we perform our gender. I don't need to get too graphic. So she's saying like that all of these little things we do to appear more feminine or appear more masculine are playing into a cultural stereotype of femininity and masculinity, and as such, we're always all in drag all of the time without even being aware of it. So we're not just existing in our natural state, and we don't even know what our natural state is anymore because we're so in culture. So this is like I said, one of those things that for me at least, once I thought about it, I kind of couldn't unsee it, and now I think about it all the time because I think it's fascinating. I'm not totally sure what I think of all of her arguments in the book, but this is one that's really stuck with me. She also, at the end of the book, urges us to make gender trouble. So this isn't a part of the book you'll read, I don't think, as far as I can remember. It's not in the handout that I'm giving you in Canvas. But she in the book says basically something like, if gender is a social construct, and if it doesn't have to be the way it is, and if we're always acting it out all the time, we can do whatever we want. So we don't have to conform to what society's telling us we should do. We can be this or be that or be both or be neither or do whatever we feel like doing. We don't have to just go along with what we're told to do. So she kind of makes this argument that we should make gender trouble. And so the title of the book becomes this kind of, not a joke exactly, but when you see the book without reading it, you might think, oh, it's about people being troubled by gender, or it's about the social trouble with gender. And then you realize it's kind of a call to action. She's encouraging us to be playful with gender, which I think is fascinating. Her argument, like I mentioned, is not uncontroversial. Well, I guess I could just say it's controversial. Why do I need the double negative? I don't know. A common counter-argument that you'll hear, and there are many, is that gender is rooted in biological sex, and thus it's not as culturally constructed and arbitrary as she makes it out to be. So I'd encourage you to think about this more and decide what you think. I'm not going to try to be ideological here and tell you should agree with her or not. I'm just presenting this as something that's interesting in the field of gender studies. So read it, consider it, decide what you think of it. We're also reading chapters 1 and 2, from the book Composing Gender. Oh, I forgot to make that title, Composing Gender, in italics. Doesn't really matter. You know it's a book title. So just to be clear, you're not reading the first 2 essays, you're reading the first 2 chapters. So that's like, what, 10 essays or something? It's quite a few. So you're reading like all the way up to page 123 in the book. This quarter is compressed. We missed the first week because we were given a 3-week spring break instead of a 2-week spring break to prepare for online delivery. So we have, what, like a 10-week quarter when we would have had an 11-week quarter. And we were told, compress it, don't leave stuff out, just, cram it in there. So I'm going to try to do that without torturing you too much. But presumably you've signed up for the class because you find the topic interesting, so maybe it won't be too torturous to read all this stuff. So you're reading up to page 123. This is nonfiction, and it's not super hard to understand, I don't think. So it's, it should be a pretty quick read once you get going. At least it was for me. I kind of like this book so far. I've never taught it before, but I'm enjoying it. So chapter 1 focuses on the question of what gender is and whether it's binary. So you might have heard the term binary before. You might have heard the term gender non-binary before. Just to be clear, the term binary in full is binary opposition. And a binary opposition is a pair of opposites like day or night or up and down, happy, sad, masculine, feminine, that we tend to think of as being defined in opposition to each other. So we tend to think of day as the opposite of night. We tend to think of happy as the opposite of sad. Light switches are binary, unless they have a dimmer. Ooh, that's a good example. Light switches traditionally have been binary, and now they sometimes have dimmers. So you flip them on and they're on, you flip them off and they're off. So it's either up or down, off or on. And so a lot of the time, we tend to understand the world in terms of opposites because it's easier to do so, and it's the way our language is created, and it's just maybe the way we think as humans. I don't know. But in the field of gender studies, an idea that's really important is that while gender might appear to be binary on the surface, either you're masculine or feminine, maybe it's not binary. Maybe a person doesn't have to be strictly masculine or feminine. Maybe none of us really are. I don't know. And maybe the 2 concepts aren't really even as opposite as they seem. So an example that always comes to mind is one of my favorite poems, for me, is one of my favorite poems by Shakespeare. And it's Sonnet 20. And I don't know if you guys have read this before, but if you have or you haven't, I've included it in the module. It's not required reading. It's just a little extra. It'll take you a couple of minutes to read. If you've taken my English 102 class recently, you've probably read it as part of the curriculum in there. But check it out. It's an interesting read. And in this poem, Shakespeare is addressing a young man. He doesn't quite say, well, he says it, I guess. He's addressing this young man, commonly referred to as the master mistress in the poem. And he's saying to this young man basically that he encompasses all of the ideal qualities of a woman, and because he has all the ideal qualities of a woman and none of the bad qualities of a woman, he's like the perfect man. So he calls him a man in hue, all hues in his controlling, in line 7, meaning basically he sets the standard for men. He's the best man out there, and he kind of is a man through and through in hue, I guess, but he also sort of creates that hue for others. So this is kind of an interesting poem. in that it suggests that maybe masculinity and femininity aren't opposite at all, but in fact, they're intertwined in a way that we hadn't even considered before. I love this one. And it's so old, and people were thinking about this stuff way back when Shakespeare was writing. I think that's fascinating. Chapter 2 deals with childhood and how we come to understand gender and identify as boys or girls when we're little. The question of nature versus nurture is central to the field of gender studies. The question of whether we're taught how to be women and men, or whether we are born understanding how to be women and men, or whether it's something that, is cultural or not, basically. In her book, The Second Sex, Simone de Beauvoir wrote that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, which is this is a famous quote. You can find it all over the internet, and there are probably posters that say it and t-shirts, and I don't know. Basically, what she means is that although biological facts are real, maybe somehow the term woman isn't just biological. Maybe it's not just something you're born physically. Maybe it's something that is cultural and that society teaches you how to be. And of course, the same would be true for man. Maybe one's not born a man, but learns how to become a man. Like, what does it mean to be a man anyway? So these are all questions that I'm hoping that we'll wrestle with this week. I hope you enjoy the readings. As always, if you have questions for me, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm available in Canada.